Hi guys, it's Allie, and if you remember last week when I said that the book binge I was on did not seem to be ending anytime soon, well, I was right, so here's part 2. If you need a recap on what this whole book binge has been about, then go check out my previous video because this is really a continuation, a part 2, if you will, of that video. So just go check that out. I will leave a link above. And let's just get into the books that I have read since then. When we left off last week, I was on the 4th book of the Raven Cycle series, and I have since finished that series altogether. I won't give another whole explanation on what that series is about and how I feel about the series as a whole because my opinion hasn't really changed since last week, but instead I will talk about that specific book that I just finished, which is the 4th and final, and I thought it was really good. It was honestly my favorite of the 4, just because it kind of brought everything into play and wrapped up all of the different loose ends, and I felt like everything had the right amount of weight put on it, if that makes sense. So I really enjoyed this book, definitely my favorite of the group, and again, if you want to hear kind of what I feel about the series as a whole, just go check out that previous video. After finishing the Raven Cycle, I went on Twitter, as you do, and I saw this tweet, which I will put on the screen somewhere right about now, and was immediately intrigued after reading the excerpt that was being discussed in said tweet. So I found some comment where they said what book that was from, and figured out that it was from the Darker Shade of Magic series by V. Schwab. So I decided to pick that one up as my next read. Once again, I read the whole series as kind of a whole. I had no sooner finished one than I picked up the next one and continued to read, so it really was a binge. So this is just kind of talking about the whole series as a whole. These were actually the first books that I read by V.E. Schwab. I have been following her on Twitter ever since I had a Twitter, just because her writing tweets are so relatable that it is often painful, but I had not actually picked up one of her books until now. So I did have some kind of high expectations going into it, because I have heard really good things about this series and about Schwab just as an author in general. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that my expectations were not only met, but exceeded. I really, really enjoyed these books. I'm a huge fan of really deep world building to the point where you can picture things in your head as clearly as if you were watching a movie, and I think that's why I liked The Merciful Crow so much, but this book and this whole series had that for me as well. This story follows Kel, who is a magical being who can traverse between different worlds. Specifically, he works in this one city, which no matter what world you are in, is always in the same place and always called London. It is just this one place that is consistent through all of the different worlds, even when everything else about them is different. Specifically, how they deal with magic. So there's Grey London, which is our London essentially, which has no magic at all. They don't remember magic. There is no magic to be found here except for when Kel brings stuff over. And then there is his London, which is Red London, which is awash with magic. Everything is magical and mysterious and great. And then there's White London, where magic is understood and acknowledged, but it is like enslaved. And then there's also Black London, which was overtaken by magic to the point where you can't actually go in it anymore. There's like nothing there. Because of his magical abilities, Kel works for the royal family of the Red London to pass along notes, messages, and even sometimes items between the different royal systems in each London. However, there is a risk to moving items between the different Londons, which he all too soon finds out when a magical item he took from White London gets into the hands of a thief from Grey London, where magic does not exist. So begins the journey. I won't really give any more explanation from there. If you want more, then go check out the Goodreads page for it. I will leave all of the books that I've read linked below, just because I feel like it is easier for you guys. If you decide that you want to read any of these books, then it'll be easier for you to just like scroll down and like click on it. So this was definitely a kind of 4-star all-around series for me. I definitely think that the first and the last books were my favorite, just to say that the second one was a little bit weaker for me, but I did really enjoy all of the kind of friendship and familial relationships that are in these books. I do think that the romance, which is actually why I got into these books, was a little bit weaker than I expected, and that might just be because my expectations were set so high by that tweet. But I did feel like the romance could have had a little bit more page time. I would not have minded that, but overall it was a really great read and I really thoroughly enjoyed it. So On to the next one. Once I had finished the Darker Shade of Magic series, I went back to my good friend, the Goodreads recommendation page, and found the Scorpion Rules duology by Aaron Bow. This one grabbed me because of the premise, even though it was a sci-fi, and this has definitely been a fantasy binge for me, but I thought the idea behind it was really interesting, so I decided to give it a shot. The story takes place in a world where an AI has basically taken over all of humanity, which is a pretty standard sci-fi premise, but what makes this book a little different is that this AI has, in order to stop world wars, has not only nuked cities, but has taken hostages from all of the families of power from different countries. Once taken hostage, these children are put into basically this academy that is also run by another AI, which basically just teaches them the classics and stuff like that, and basically it's just this really strict boarding school almost. One of those children is our main character and our POV character, Greta, who is the princess of a kingdom in this world. She is very good at being a hostage. She has been a hostage since she was 5, I believe, and she has basically just gone along with the rules to a T. She's never had any issues, even when her country and another country, which is basically the Americas, is almost at the tipping point of war. She has always remained loyal and faithful and done what she had to do, and basically lived her life as a martyr. That all changes, however, when a new hostage is brought into their little compound, and it is very clear that he is not there willingly. So Greta is kind of forced to reconsider her life up until that point, and also her views, both in relation to their AI dictator god, and also in relation to how she views herself. So that's basically the setup of this story. In terms of how much I liked it, again, I read these 2 books like back to back, so my thoughts about them are very much mingled, but overall, I think they were a very enjoyable read. I liked reading them, but in comparison to a lot of the other books that I've read, both lately and just in general, I think the characters felt a little flat to me. They made sense, but they were all relatively one-dimensional. They did have other aspects to them, but you had the kind of martyr figure, and then you had the hero figure, and then you had the villain figure. And so while certain characters had a lot of character growth, the AI, for example, is probably the best character in the whole thing for me. Everybody just felt like they were playing a single role, and there wasn't a ton of overlap with other characters and impacting other characters and things like that. So even though I really enjoyed the story, I thought the concept was cool, I thought the execution was cool, I thought the characters were cool, there was always this kind of disconnect between me and the story, and I can't really pick out why that was the case, but I just always kind of felt like I was looking at the story through a looking glass, not feeling the story as if it were happening around me, which is something that you definitely feel when you're reading something like A Darker Shade of Magic or some of the other books I'm going to talk about later. Because of that distance, some of the characters' relationships also felt a little weird to me and felt strangely insta-lovey even when they weren't insta-love, and it's just, I don't know. I can't really explain why I felt weirdly about this book. I just did, and I still very much recommend that you read it if that premise is interesting to you, because the actual execution of the story was really interesting. It just wasn't kind of as personal to me, or it didn't like feel as connected to me as some of these other books did. That all being said though, I did give these books a 3, both of them. So that is not to say that I disliked these books at all. I did like them. I just had some issues with them that couldn't quite reconcile the things that I did like about them. At this point in the binge, I went back to V.E. Schwab to read her Monsters of Verity duology, which is This Savage Song and Our Dark Duet, and I really liked these books. For a while, I debated if I liked them better than the Darker Shade of Magic series, but I think that I like them both equally, but for different reasons. This duology is an urban fantasy that takes place in a city which has been split into over the issue of monsters. In this world, monsters start appearing in the wake of violent acts. What kind of violent act was committed determines what kind of monster is going to pop up in the world as a result. First are the Corsai, which are the most abundant and also the least human and most monstery, because they are born from non-lethal acts of violence. So they are pretty terrifying in the sense that they eat human flesh, but they are more manageable in the sense that they are only allowed to walk around in the dark. They're these kind of shadowy creatures, and they are drawn to fear. They have like a hive mind, so they don't think independently of one another. They are just kind of all one unit. The second type of monster is the Malachi, which are created from murder. They're probably closest to a traditional vampire in the sense that they feed off of blood and they are hurt by the sun but are able to walk around in it. And unlike the Corsai, they do have independent minds. They can think freely for themselves, but they are still very animalistic in the sense that they are out for blood. The third type of monster, which are the rarest and most human of the bunch, are the Sunai, who are created from mass destruction or devastation. The Sunai's power is kind of like a siren or like a Pied Piper, where they use music to feed on their victims. Sunai look human aside from little tattoos on their skin that dictate how long it has been since they went dark. I won't explain what that means, read the book and you'll find out. And they are able to see the souls of sinners, which is to say that if somebody has sinned, their soul will glow red, which indicates to the Sunai that they are ripe for eating. That all out of the way, this story follows Kate, who is the daughter of the dictator slash crime boss of North City, which is totally against monsters and even has some monsters as pets, and August, who is a Sunai himself and is kind of the adoptive son of the guy running the south part of the city where monsters are much more out and about. Kate is desperate to prove herself to her father, and August is desperate to prove to himself that he can be human. August is sent undercover as a human to go kind of keep an eye on Kate, and the story begins there. After reading 2 series by V. Schwab now, it is very clear to me that she is a master of world building. Every part of this story was so vivid to me. The characters, the monsters, the world around them, just the kind of environment that they're in, it was all so clear in my head, which is just something that is a huge plus for these books. While I was reading these, I thought for sure that I preferred them to the Darker Shade of Magic series, but in retrospect, having completed both of them, I think it was just because I think the romance is stronger in this series, the Savage Song series, but I think the familial and friendship relationships are much stronger in the Darker Shade of Magic series. They like traded off the weaknesses. I think the romance was a lot stronger here, but I do wish that I had seen more aspects of friendship and more aspects of the family dynamic, specifically between Kate and her dad, but you don't get a ton of it aside from what is relevant to the plot. So that is the only thing that I could complain about for these books. I have them listed as a 4-star for right now. I'm not sure. I feel like they're kind of around like a 4.5 for me, so I might end up changing my Goodreads score, but that's where we're at for now. These are definitely a recommend for me, so check out that link in the description. This next book was interesting. It was a standalone retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses Grimm fairy tale. This showed up in my recommended for fantasy, and I was not really finding anything at the time that was really drawing me, so I decided to give this book a shot. Suffice it to say that it was really just a pretty standard retelling. There weren't any additional things added to the story to add more intrigue. There was no subplots thrown in. There was really not a lot that was improved upon from the original story. If you've seen my video on retellings, you will know that I consider there to be 3 main categories when it comes to retelling a story that already exists. One where you don't really change anything at all, one where you change maybe significant subplots or add significant things but don't change the main bones of the story, and then the third category where a lot of things are changed to the point where it's just kind of vaguely inspired by the original story, not an actual retelling. This one is definitely way on the side of not changing anything. And what I mean by that is just that it was a very clean, very quick read. I think I read this whole book in the span of 2 hours, but it was not really that different from the original Grimm fairy tale. And I can appreciate that for what it is, but in terms of whether or not you are going to pay money to read something that is very similar to something that you could consume for free, I would just recommend that you go read the original fairy tale. It's still cute though. I just don't recommend that you spend money on something that is so similar to an original story. And we approach the end once again. The final series that I read as part of this book binge part 2, and I think the final book series that I've read in this book binge overall, I think, is the Lynn Byrne Legacy series by Sarah Rees Brennan. This story takes place in a sleepy village in England called Surrey in the Vale, where a girl named Kemi lives with a secret. That secret is that she is 17 years old and still has an imaginary friend. His name is Jared, and he's American, and she loves him. An aspiring investigative reporter, Kemi runs a school newspaper with her best friend Angela, where she desperately tries to find something interesting about her town. Her prayers are answered when the Lynn Byrne family, who basically used to run the town of Surrey in the Vale but then left mysteriously 20 years ago, suddenly return and re-inhabit their old abandoned mansion in the town. And what a scoop for Kemi when she learns that the Lynn Byrnes have had some kids of their own while they were traipsing around America, namely 2 young boys named Ash and Jared. Are you surprised? Of course you're not, but subverting expectations is not always the point. Our dear Kemi, whom I love, then finds herself way too wrapped up in all of the secrets of the Lynn Byrne family and of her town in general, due in no small part to the fact that Jared is not so imaginary after all. These books are just really good. I love stories that are able to take premises that you might initially look at and roll your eyes and think, oh, well, that's been done so many times before, and once you give them that chance, they're able to run with that premise and do something with it that you've never seen before. I honestly love how the whole mind connection thing is played out in these books. Not only do I like how it's played out, I love that it makes sense. It has context in the world around them. It's not just some random magical thing that has nothing to do with the rest of the story, which is something I see way too often in these kind of stories, but it is something that makes sense, it is explained in the book, and it's something that then leads on to a deeper world and a deeper story that is able to unfold after you figured out that first initial thing. I also just adored these characters. I will admit that it did take me a while to get used to the kind of I'm so quirky way that some of the characters talk, specifically Kemi. She is definitely the worst offender of this, but I overall still really enjoyed it. It was never to the point that it turned me off from her character, and in fact, having let myself continue on and get through the rest of the story, that is something that changes with her character arc. She starts off being very jokey, very quirky, saying random stuff because that's her kind of defense mechanism. She doesn't like to be serious about things, and so that's something that changes throughout the story. She becomes more mature, she becomes more vulnerable and more thoughtful, and that's just something that goes along with that character change, and I love that. I love seeing character development play out in not just the way that a character acts and feels, but also in the way that they speak and the way they communicate with others. All of these characters are really unique, they're all really interesting, and they all have their own character arcs, not just related to Kemi and to the main storyline, but they each have their own individual storylines as well that just flow so flawlessly into the rest of the story, and I just think it works really well as like an ensemble cast, obviously with Kemi and Jared kind of heading up the front. The characters are great, the descriptions are vivid, you can really see the things happening around you, and like with any good ensemble cast story, you really feel like you're part of the group and that you're part of this mission that they're going on. And the plot to me was really interesting and really well paced. I am a huge fan of sticking characters in rooms and making them talk about their feelings, and this book has no shortage of that. I understand that like some people read this book and gave it somewhat negative reviews because they thought the plot was the weakest element of the story, but I would argue that sometimes the plot doesn't need to be the strongest element of a story if the character arcs can make up for that meandering. And honestly, I don't necessarily agree that the plot is weak in the first place, but I don't care because I like the characters better anyway. So I was really happy with it. It was really like right up my alley, my cup of tea type stuff. I also then read all of the little short stories, which are available for free, by the way, that are taken from the spring before the events of the story, the summer before the events of the story, and then the night between the first book and the second book. My favorite by far of all of those is the spring before I met you, which follows Jared's guidance counselor / art teacher, and it's just lovely and I really enjoyed it. So I definitely recommend those books, and I also recommend that you read the free short stories because I love when authors do that, when they just like throw out free content for people. That's so great. Anyway, yeah, so those are the most recent and I think final books that I have read in this book binge. I have read like 20 something books in the past like month and a half, and that is so much more than I have read in like the rest of the year before that. So this has definitely been a successful binge for me, and I feel like I've read a lot of great books out of it. There's really nothing that I could say was a disappointment. I think the book that I enjoyed the least would be The Princess of the Midnight Ball, but I wasn't really expecting that to be my favorite book ever anyway, and I think my favorite would definitely have to be The Merciful Crow, though the Lynn Byrne Legacy series is probably a close second to that. So that's going to be it for this book binge. I think it's over now. I think this is the end of the book binge. I went back on Goodreads, looked in my recommendation, looked in my want to read lists, and I just didn't really find anything that was like super speaking to me. So I think we can say that this is mostly done. I might read like another book or two, but I don't think it's going to be with the same frenzy that has been taking over me for the past month and however long. I hope that my sheer insanity has led you to some new books, maybe that you hadn't heard of before, or maybe that you had heard of but hadn't picked up yet. And if that's not the case, then thanks for watching the video anyway. I am going to try to turn my focus to writing for this next week and just try to take all of the energy that I've been accumulating from reading all of these great books to put those into working on my work in progress. So maybe next week I'll be coming at you with a writing update. If not, then you know that I have failed in my quest. But yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like, and if you like my content, do subscribe, because I make videos every Friday, most of the time. And I will see you guys in the next one. What is this?